All right, so we've talked about the Top Gun movies a little bit, but what did you think about them, first and the second?
Yeah, so I'll say the first movie, there were some flying scenes that were flown in actual aircraft, but when you saw the actors themselves, Tom Cruise or Val Kilmer or whatever, they're all in a set somewhere. Whereas in the second Top Gun movie, now when you're watching the actors, they're in the back seat of an F-18, and you can, it looks very realistic because the G-forces that, are pulling down on your cheeks and all that, you're seeing that. So I thought that was cool about the second movie. I thought that, in terms of watching the movies, and I've seen both many times, some things are made to look exciting on camera, especially how close the airplanes are when they're, flying down a canyon or whatever. As I said, these days we don't tend to be that close anymore. And some of the tactics they mention are to the point where, I actually on the second movie I had to tell myself, okay, just throw away your concern for reality, about gosh, what was it in the second movie? Wasn't it somebody flies in front of Tom Cruise and takes a missile for him or whatever? Yeah. Okay, just take a deep breath. Don't worry about reality and just enjoy it for the entertainment's sake alone. And it from that perspective, both are really great movies from an entertainment perspective. And let's be honest, they did have a lot of airborne shots. And although the tactics may not be realistic, they still look really cool. And it's better than any other. Let me put it this way. Also, it's better than any other Hollywood movie I've seen about fighter aviation.
Right. Okay. Were you able to sort of with the other fighter pilot we've had in here was saying that he was able to like empathize with it, that it was so action packed that he was kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like living it with them, kind of like gripping on his.
Yeah. And actually, also might be kind of related. We also asked the other fighter pilot: is there an airplane that you haven't flown that you wish that you would have?
Oh well, certainly the F-35.
Right.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Apart from that,
I love flying, and I wish if I could have done anything. Some of these older classic airplanes. Again, I'm an airplane nut, and they're probably quite dangerous to fly, actually. But at least in U.S. examples, the F-86 Sabre, iconic airplane from the Korean War that had a 13-to-1 kill ratio against the MiGs. So a couple airplanes like that, I really wish I would have had a chance to fly.
All right.
P-51 Mustang.
Iconic
Classic airplane. Yeah.
Nice.
Of course, those are still around. You probably could still fly them, but
yeah.
Sure.
I think was it so that Petteri answered that he would have wanted to fly the A-10.
Yeah. All right, let's talk F-35. Yeah, we know nothing about it. Tell us something about it. What kind of a fighter jet is the F-35?
Okay, so it's great that we had this conversation already about fourth and fifth generation aircraft, right?
Yep.
So it is the only fifth generation aircraft in production in the West right now, and it is just an amazing airplane. Again, it's got that that very low observability, so you are almost impossible to detect. You've got these built-in, highly advanced sensors that, as a pilot, give you extremely good situational awareness, and you've got a very, very high bandwidth data link that we call MADL. It stands for the Multifunction Advanced Data Link. Goes a really long distance. It's very hard to detect, and so you're basically whatever picture you have is the same picture that everybody else in your formation has, and that's really helpful as well. So yeah, it's a fantastic capability.
Well, okay, yeah. Apart from the low visibility or low, what's it called?
Just low observability.
Low observability. Apart from that, is there anything else that sets it apart from the competition? Well, also the sensory.
Yeah, so let me talk about the sensors and the situational awareness a little bit, and I'm gonna I have to give credit to an Italian Air Force pilot that I saw describing it, an Italian Air Force F-35 pilot describing it this way, and it's not my words, therefore, but it seems to fit because describing situational awareness that a pilot has is it's hard enough to tell a fourth generation pilot what it's like in a fifth generation aircraft. So for the general public, the explanation that he gave, which I thought was actually a good way of looking at it, is if you're in a fourth generation fighter, imagine that you're in a car. This is the equivalency. You're in a car driving through a tunnel that goes through a mountain. So what you see is what's on the other end of the tunnel. You can see light, you can see some shapes, but as a fourth generation pilot, that's sort of the equivalent of what you see. Now, if you're a fifth generation pilot, the difference is now you can imagine you're sitting on top of the mountain. You're not in the tunnel, and you see everything around you all at once. And because you've got this network with your wingman, not only do you see what's around your mountain, you see what's around your wingman's mountain, who's 70 kilometers away that way, and you see what's on your other wingman's mountain around that, another 70 kilometers that way. And so that's where I get into you can make choices on which way to take your airplane and which threat is really a threat and which one you can ignore from now so much more easily in a fifth generation airplane because you have this complete awareness of what's going around you versus the fourth gen where it's kind of I know what's right off my nose.
That's a lot of more awareness.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
it is. It's mind blowing. Yeah.
So what kind of missions is the F-35 capable of conducting?
Yeah, so it is truly a multi-role fighter. So air to air, so going against enemy aircraft, air to ground, launching at things either on the ground, on the water, and then we get into more specialized versions of that. Suppression of enemy air defenses, which is taking out an enemy's surface-to-air missiles. But what's really great about the F-35, because of these sensors that are built in, and there's so many of them, I don't want to sound like I'm talking to a PowerPoint chart. I'll just say there's a variety of built-in sensors that look not just at infrared spectrum, but also at different radio frequencies from very low to very high. So you're automatically, your airplane is automatically building a picture of what's on you on the ground or in the air all around you and recording that. So basically you're doing an intel collection mission, right? You're an ISR platform, you're an intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance platform in an F-35 while you're doing a completely different mission, like maybe, intercepting Russian airplanes or something. You also are building a picture of what's on the ground, which is a reason why you will catch through press. There are a lot of F-35s on the periphery of Ukraine right now. Mm. Constant deployments from either the Dutch or the U.S. Air Force, Italians, so that while you're flying and doing training in Romania or Poland, but you're also collecting intel on what the systems are that the Russians are using in Ukraine. And if you notice that they're on a different frequency one day, using a wartime reserve, you can record that and put that back into your database. So that's a capability that the F-35 has that fourth generation airplanes can't do.
Yeah, so as well as providing more awareness to the squadron that you're operating with, they are also providing more awareness to boots on ground and like the whole system.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the picture that I talked about, that you're seeing what's on top of your mountain and the next mountain over and so on, you're not just networking that to your own formation, but with the right connections, and there will be the right connections, you're feeding that into your national command and control structure so that the appropriate parts of that are fed throughout the network. And there's a need, and it's coming, I'm sure, is that there has to be some AI to help with that, because the amount of data from the F-35 is overwhelming. So you can't just pump all of it into the system. So there are already some ways to filter it, but but it's gonna. So let me. You talked about I think the riflemen on the ground, right?
Yep.
So three things I can think of. So first of all, because of the amazing defensive, or I'd say the immense, because of the characteristics of the F-35 to be able to defend territory, right? You are in a great position to destroy enemy aircraft coming towards that rifleman. In a much better position to do that because, again, you can't be detected. So you're protecting that rifleman from enemy attack. That's sort of a direct effect. There's also the SA, the situation awareness that you can provide to that rifleman or that rifleman's unit. And then there's finally, it's connected to that SA, but even if you're completely out of weapons in an F-35, you can send your data, and we've done experiments like this, and I know this will happen in Finland. You can send your targeting data to a GMLRS, so Guided Multiple Launch Rocket System of the Finnish Army, or you can send it to a Squadron 2020 ship or whatever, and they can target things based on your information, things that they can't even see because they're all on the ground. And the radar horizon is a thing, and you can't see things beyond the curvature of the earth when you're on the ground, but you can in the air, and you can pass that information back to your shooters either on the ground or on the surface to take that threat out.
Right. Okay. So we often in our podcast, we're trying to reference everything back to that rifleman, that regular reservist. So that's exactly it. But so you're saying that the platform is a lot more advanced, but for the pilot, it's not as much more complicated as it is much more advanced. So they got systems in place for that.
So it's easier. First of all, just the mechanics of flying the airplane are easier because it's got more advanced flight controls, better flight control computers, and then the information, the way it's presented to the pilot, it's much easier to digest, and you have much more of it, and it's presented in a coherent fashion. So those things make it much easier tactically. But now you can do things in an F-35 or a fifth generation airplane because of those attributes that you wouldn't even dream of doing in a fourth generation airplane. You can be relatively close to advanced Russian surface-to-air threats like an S-400 and be attacking Russian aircraft, for example, because you have the ability to do that. Now, there are some things that you have to do in terms of maneuvers to keep that going, and in the targeting and in the watching of the surface threats and all that, you get really busy. You're just as busy doing that as you might have been on a quote-unquote simpler mission in a fourth generation aircraft. So the workload is there, but you're doing some amazing combat capable missions that you couldn't even do before. So you'll get to a point where you're very busy, and no matter what airplane you're doing, but you're just doing it so much more and so much better in an F-35.
All right,
That's cool.
Yeah,
That's so cool.
that is. Sorry.
Yeah, no,
Let
go
me
ahead.
jump
go
in
ahead.
here.
Yeah.
I got a question. Let me know if we hit a. I'm going off script. Let me know if we hit a gray zone here. But a lot of NATO countries have the F-35. Say, for example, Norway, and we're getting it, and we're neighboring countries.
Yeah.
Do you think they can, in this sense that you're saying that it's an integrated sort of ISR platform and a lot of data going through, can they sort of talk to each other?
Yeah, and they do already, right? So there's been several exercises. Once Finland gets its F-35s, it'll be able to join in these where we've shared data from U.S. Air Force to Norwegian F-35s on this MADL data link that I talked about, the highly advanced data link we've got, and it's relatively seamless. So this will happen when Finland joins as well, because an F-35 is an F-35.
Yeah.
A Finnish F-35 is no different from a U.S. Air Force F-35. So they'll be able to communicate with each other, and we're working. When I say we, I think the U.S. military is working on the protocols so that when we're all up and going, if a Norwegian Air Force F-35 lands in Finland, then Finnish technicians should be able to refuel and rearm, and vice versa.
Right.
And that's an incredible, force multiplier when you have that similar airplane flying. If you look at a map of the Baltic Sea, sorry, not ocean, and then the F-35 countries that are around that. So you got Finland, Norway, Denmark, Germany, Poland. There's not very many gaps around the Baltic of countries that don't have the F-35.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, did I cut you off at one point?
Not at all. Not at all. No.
I'm trying to figure out where I was going with before, but let me ask you this: how does it affect, say, U.S. military or Lockheed Martin, that when we decided to buy the F-35, that we're sort of like a frontier country, sort of like actually neighboring Russia, as opposed to, not to take away from the Belgians, but they're a lot further away.
Sure.
And I mean, I guess, like, I think especially before the war, the Russians were doing a lot of runs kind of around Norway and flying all the way down to Spain. And it was interesting to see. So first the Norwegian F-35s would meet them there, and then or at least the Norwegian Air Force, and then the British would meet them, and then the Spaniards, and then they would go back the same way, and then the same guys would meet them up there.
Yeah.
So obviously, being a frontier country is it really depends, but we're actually bordering Russia, and
you have NATO's longest border with Russia.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How does that play into? Is that from a Lockheed Martin / U.S. military perspective, or
so? I can't answer from a U.S. military perspective because I'm no longer in the U.S. military. So I won't talk about or speculate what the U.S. thinks of Finland buying the F-35, but I think it's probably a good thing.
Yeah,
let's just say that. I will just let me just say that from, again, a person, an American who's lived in Finland on and off and continues to come here. Let's see, my first trip here was 2011. So what does that make it? 13 years or something like that. I am really happy about the F-35 and the deterrent capability it gives, right? Because it's an extremely potent weapon, and it's going to make an adversary, Russia, now that we're all NATO, really think hard about messing with Finland.
Yeah.
And that's what we all want, whether it's Finland or the West or NATO.
Yeah.
It's good for all of us.
Right.
Absolutely.
All right. What about, it gets pretty cold up here, I'm sure you've noticed.
Yeah.
How does the F-35 handle the cold?
Yeah, it's good. So and all airplanes, by the way, don't necessarily love the cold.
Yeah.
It makes it does strange things to fluids and seals and all that. But the U.S. Air Force, and I can't remember how long now, 5 years or so, we've got 2 squadrons of F-35s at a place called Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska, and the latitude of Eielson Air Force Base is very close to the latitude of Rovaniemi.
Okay.
And then, of course, your Nordic cousins in Norway have been flying the F-35 for a while in pretty serious winter conditions. So it's going to be fine.
Right.
Yeah.
That reminds me, I finally get to tell this on the podcast. I was surfing up in northern Norway a while ago, and I'm sitting on this beach we're talking North Atlantic up in Lofoten. And I'm talking to my friend, and from the side of my eye, I'm just looking at it. There's a big ass.
That's a big bird.
That's a big bird flying over there, and I look over, and it's kind of 2 sets of mountain ranges on both sides, and it's a really really cool beach. And then just suddenly these 2 F-35 just show up from one side, and just they're flying at maybe, I want to throw out maybe 200, 300 meters, just really low, really slow, just flying across the surf beach. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is the greatest moment ever.
Yeah.
that was a great moment. I feel like my friends didn't really appreciate it quite as much as I did.
You're the right man in the right place.
Oh,
at the
yeah.
right time.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure. A little bit more about the F-35 and the construction process in general. How long does it take to build an F-35?
Yeah, so it takes about from the time a contract is finally signed and the money starts flowing to us to when an aircraft comes off the production line, it's about 3 years.
All right.
And you start by making some of the really, really big parts first. And these aren't made in our factory. We have suppliers that make these. So like the bulkheads, which are these giant, titanium and aluminum. Titanium and aluminum parts that are something like 2 or 3 meters high by 5-6 meters wide. They go through the fuselage of the aircraft and into the wings to form the structure. Make big parts like that first. And of course, all the subcomponents and all that. And about a year or so from when the airplane is done. So that, 2 years to make all those subcomponents. So about a year from when it's finished, there's going to be something that looks like an F-35 in our factory. So in the case of Finland, you will be getting your first jets in the fall of 2025, which means that this fall there'll be pieces, for example, the forward fuselage of the F-35 is one of the first major components that comes together. Right now we build those in Fort Worth, Texas only. By the way, Patria will be building those here in Finland. They're going to make 400 of them.
Yeah, cool.
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah, so not just for the Finnish F-35s, but for the our worldwide supply chain.
That's great.
So those will start coming together, and then by I'd say March, April of next year, we're going to start putting them. It's like sort of a big jigsaw puzzle. I mean, like a really big one. So you mate the forward fuselage to the center fuselage to the center wing box to the two wings to the aft fuselage, and then you start putting in the tail surfaces and all that. And that starts happening around March of or so of next year for that aircraft that'll be delivered in fall, October of next year. So sorry, long answer, but about 3 years. And it's already, like I said, it's already started for the Finnish airplanes. So
yeah. Sweet.
Yeah,
what was you kind of already mentioned that the process of Finnish Air Force testing out or wanting to know, figuring out which one to buy was really rigorous. I'm sure it wasn't a cakewalk for you guys. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so it took, I think the actual bidding process, so there was 4 rounds of what we call bidding and negotiations. So it started with an RFI, request for information. And I want to say that was somewhere around 2016, 17. It was before I even joined our team. And then that's just what it sounds like, to all the manufacturers. Tell us everything that we want to know about the airplane. And they'll actually specify here the things we want to know. It's, range, radar capability, but there's a lot to it. So it's just the list of questions was like a 100+ page, if you printed it out, request. And I'll also say, our company's experience is by far all the questions that we got from Finland were much more detailed and lengthy than any other competition we've been in.
I was about to ask that.
Yeah. Same.
Cool.
So there was the RFI at first, and then 2 rounds of what's called RFQs, request for quotations, where now pricing is put into it. So the first round, I think we weren't given a maximum price. It's just like, tell us what you can do and also tell us how much it costs. And,
right.
And it was probably just like for all of the manufacturers, it was like, oh my God, it's way too much. And then the second RFQ was, okay, tell us what you can do with this much as a maximum. And then there was the final round, the RF BAFO, it was called, Request for Best and Final Offer, where it was basically refining, all the things that all the information that the Finns had gotten, and best and final offer. It's kind of like buying a car, right? Okay, you gave me a price last time, but can you do better? So it was a very comprehensive process, and yes, they did get a better price from us in the end, and I think probably from all the other OEMs as well. OEM is original equipment manufacturer. It's in shorthand how we refer to other big companies. And I got on a fairly friendly basis with my counterparts from my competitors, my Boeing counterpart and my Saab counterpart, and so on. And we'd also have verbal negotiation sessions after each round of these answers, where the Finnish HX team would say, "Yeah, it looks good. We need more information here. This doesn't meet our needs." Very frank about it, as you can imagine. And so, I'd talk to my counterparts, and we wouldn't say exactly where we were behind or ahead or whatever, but we'd just say, "Man, that was a tough session. we got a long way to go." So that was the reaction from all of us. So it was an extremely thorough process, the most thorough process we've seen. Unlike other countries, though, where sometimes it just gets drawn out longer and longer and longer, we had from the day the schedule was first announced, whatever it was, 2016, 17, to when this finished in 2022, the only delay was a 6-month COVID slip, and that's it. So, hats off to the Finns for doing that, because lots of countries, sometimes things just get bogged down, politics gets involved. So that was good. Gosh, what was the original question? Sorry. Now,
just about the process.
Yeah.
How rigorous was it? And you're answering it right now.
And so, one other thing I wanted to say about that, as a testament, I guess, to the process that the Finns did. So you guys in Switzerland were running competitions more or less simultaneously, and both F-18 users, and we could tell, from the types of questions we were getting from both Finland and Switzerland, that was some sharing of ideas, which is fine. And Finland ended up signing its contract just slightly before Switzerland. But after that, let's say we got Germany, Czech Republic, and Greece. And all of those have been, we just want the F-35. We don't need to do a competition. Look at what Finland did, and they did the most thorough competition known to humankind. So we don't need to do all that. We'll just take what they took.
Yeah, so they were just waiting that if it's good enough for Finland, it's good enough for us. Okay,
exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice to know. Yeah.
So Finland's process is like a proof of concept then.
No, actually, we actually heard from the German Air Force some words to that effect.
That's nice.
Yeah, I'm gonna imagine in a good way that the Greeks and the Czechs are saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Probably.
Right.
Yeah.
That's cool. When you sent in the BAFO, was it called? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When you sent in that, how certain were you that Finland was going to go with the F-35?
Not certain.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
So I will just briefly outline the grading of the competition. So there was 3 pass-fail steps in the HX competition that you weren't graded. Either you did it or you didn't. And it was the affordability, so the cost to buy and the cost to operate. That was one of them. Security of supply, which to a Finn, I don't have to go into great
Nope.
explanation of what that means. And then industrial participation. To create basically economic value. If you passed all those, then you get graded on your military capability, and that's not a pass-fail. That's a whoever does best is the best choice. We were pretty sure that we had the best military capability because all the things I talked about with 5th generation aircraft and so on. There were times early in the process where it looked like we weren't going to pass some of those basic steps, but we did a lot of work on our side. And we thought, I think we're going to meet the needs on these, but we weren't 100% certain.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it turns out in the end, I think 2 of the competitors did not meet. If you watch the press conference, what was it, December of 2021 when the announcement came out. Basically, at the end, there was only 3 competitors, not 5.
Yeah. That's what I also understood. But yeah, that's interesting to hear, and I think if we got international listeners, I think that speaks a lot for the sort of the military culture, the culture that the military has here. That stuff like this is important. You can't just like. If the military needs something, they probably need it for a good reason.
Yeah.
There's a lot of heritage in like being, what's the term, militarily non-aligned. So having to do stuff alone and figuring stuff out. Stuff needs to work up here in the north. It gets really cold. It gets really, I don't know, shitty.
Harsh.
Yeah,
Harsh and shitty up north.
And even I suspect even with NATO membership, right? It's with the security supply, the ability to operate and fly and maintain with closed borders.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was we did a lot of work to ensure that.
Yeah,
and we got a pass. So
sweet.
Yeah, we're happy with the outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it speaks volumes of the process when the German military is satisfied enough with our process that they can just be like, yeah, we'll do it as the Finns do. Yeah. That's great.
Yes. So I actually got to see the F-35 also last. Did I already talk about this? No, I didn't.
No, not this one.
This one.
Not this encounter with the F-35.
I've had a few encounters, not a lot. At an exercise in eastern Finland, because the Finnish military uses roadside road bases, and we can talk more about that later. But I got to see it there that a Norwegian F-35 landed on a just Finnish stretch of road.
Yeah, I only saw a video of that.
Yeah. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's to me it looks really cool. To me, all fighter jets look cool, but I feel like there was an extra level of cool in the F-35.
Yeah, I wish I could have been there. Yeah.
Yeah, and what was really cool is it was the Norwegian, the British and the Norwegians took part in the exercise. I will say that they were not the only nations apart from Finland who were there to see it happen. And what was I saying? Yeah. I think like the Norwegian chief of their Air Force was there, but also I say squadron commander or whoever was the dude whose F-35s it was that landed there, because what they did was it's called a hot refuel.
Yeah,
and it was all cool. And then, but that dude, when he was standing on the sideline, and he's with his arms crossed, just like a proud dad looking at his planes, he was just like, "Fuck yeah!" It was just, you could just sense that how proud he was of that, and to be in that historical moment. That was cool. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the Finnish Air Force.
Yeah.
You've had some contact to them by now. But while you were still in the service, did you ever come across the Finnish Air Force?
So I never got a chance to do any training with the Finnish Air Force. Unfortunately, no. I was stationed in Iceland, and A, it was pretty far away from Finland, and B, although the Cold War had just ended, we were still very NATO focused as a U.S. Air Force back then, and that physically was about as close as I got to the Finnish Air Force. But I did have a chance, as I mentioned, to fly in a Finnish Air Force Hornet and a Hawk. So when I had my Hornet flight, went through the briefing, which all the, by the way, you may know this, but all the in-flight comm communications that the Finnish Air Force does since I think the early 2000s is all in English.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the briefings normally aren't. They're normally in Finnish. But for my benefit, they did the briefing in English, and I'm just sitting there going through this thing, going, "Man, I could be in an F-15 squadron with the tactics they're talking about, and the words and the numbers they're using again for the threat, and how close can you get to the threat." And then I went out and we did the mission. Very very professional and pretty extreme maneuvering, I would say. When I say extreme, we had to deal with some weather conditions that day, which I think you do almost every day in Finland, that we have the luxuries, like when I'm flying out of Las Vegas, Nevada,
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, there's a cloud way over there. But extremely competent, skilled, very impressed. And, the U.S. Air Force has now started to participate in these exercises in Finland, like the Arctic Challenge exercise, the ACE. And some of that started while I was stationed here as a defense attaché. And we, as an Air Force, we just want to keep coming back because, there are and I'll try to be polite about this. There are some European countries that are relatively new to NATO. I won't name names, but when even back to the days I was in the U.S. Air Force, when you go there to fly with that country, you're sort of guiding them along and showing them how it's done, and you're maybe not getting training yourself. But when you come up here to the Nordics, and I'll say for the most part the same thing about Sweden or Norway as well, they're just as good as you are. You're just as good as we are, however you want to put that. And you're getting some genuine training on both sides. And that's why the U.S. Air Force likes to keep coming back here.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the Finnish Air Force's dispersed tactics and roadside bases?
Yeah,
do you do that in the States at all? Or?
So we did. I saw this question written down. It's a great question, and I kind of had to think about it a lot. So if you go back to World War II, that's exactly what we did all the time, right? So you're always moving around. Of course, the front line is moving as well. And we did some of that during the Cold War in the U.S., especially like the A-10s that you mentioned, the sort of the tank busting aircraft. We practiced that. But, even in my times in the Cold War, the U.S. Air Force, we didn't tend to do the dispersed operations as far as moving around constantly very much. And I had to think about that. Well, why was that? Well, things were a little bit different back then. Back in the 70s and early 80s, the Soviets didn't have highly accurate ballistic missiles that could go a long way to take your airplanes out on the ground. Their aircraft did not carry guided weapons. It's dumb bombs. And we had hardened shelters that gave you some pretty good protection against air attack. Again, back in the Cold War era. But now it's a little bit different. And this reminds me of, I had a chance on one of my deployments right after Desert Storm. I was deployed immediately after the war ended to Saudi Arabia. And I got the chance to go to Kuwait and look at a Kuwaiti airfield that had been occupied by the Iraqis. And every single hardened shelter had a massive crater hole at the top from where someone from one of the Allied forces had dropped a precision weapon through that hardened shelter. So hardened shelters are no longer the protection they used to be, and now the threat's got long-range ballistic missiles, and now the threat has got highly precision weapons, just like we do. So there's definitely a great need to disperse your forces. In the U.S. Air Force now, it's called Agile Combat Employment. But hey, as you know, the Finns have been doing it all along.
Yep.
And your neighbor doesn't need long range weapons to get to you, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So the threat's been there the whole time, and I really see NATO and the U.S. Air Force has a lot to learn, I think, from how Finland does its distributed or dispersed operations.
Yeah, because and again, I know very little about this, and you can fill in on this, but to international listeners, again, we only have a limited amount of, as opposed to the U.S. Air Force, who have the limit is a lot bigger, but we have and will have those about 60 fighters, and in a time of crisis, those will kind of spread out everywhere in Finland to regular airports and then just roadside bases. So regular stretches of road, of highways that will just be turned into air bases, essentially, in the middle of nowhere. And then they'll just work from there just to increase the survivability, because like you said.
Yeah, and obviously you can see clips on YouTube of the Finnish Air Force practicing that.
Yeah.
It's fantastic to watch.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It was great to see that last year up close and live. We've been kind of around this a little bit, and this is not necessarily specific to Finland, but how difficult do you think it is for the Finnish Air Force to switch over to the 5th generation?
So it'll require some mind shift, shift in your mental thinking, I guess. Yeah. And sometimes what we've seen in the U.S. Air Force is that the guys that are quicker to pick up on how to maximize the capabilities of a fifth-gen airplanes are the ones that haven't flown anything prior. The guys that have flown fourth-generation airplanes for a while, of course, the mechanics of learning the system and taking off and landing and all that, it might come pretty quick to them. But really, in the combat employment, sometimes they're still stuck in their old ways for a little while. So, but I'm confident the Finnish Air Force will do just fine, just like the Norwegian Air Force did, just like the U.S. Air Force is doing. So it'll be a learning curve, but it won't be a problem.
Nice. That's glad to.
Yeah, happy to hear that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so yeah,
in fact, this isn't the first time it's happened, but the Finnish Air Force is already sending pilots to some of our simulator facilities.
Okay, but yeah, we already mentioned in passing earlier Ukraine, and we're super interested in that. As an experienced fighter pilot, what have your thoughts been on the war in Ukraine, and especially the air warfare that's been going on over there?
Yeah, so it's the air warfare in Ukraine has been almost non-existent. Let me put it that way, which has been a surprise, but also not a surprise. What we see right now of air warfare from either side, these sort of again, based on what's available on video, but sort of these mad low-level dashes to make an attack, and then escape with your life type of thing, and that's starting to change a little bit. But the reason that it's driven to that is that the what we call the IADS, the Integrated Air Defense System, on both sides is relatively intact, and that includes, of course, early warning radars, but most importantly, the surface-to-air missiles. In the case of Russia, the S-400s, the S-300s that are pretty lethal. And so when you've got a fourth-generation aircraft, especially an older sort of Russian-designed fourth-generation aircraft that are on both sides right now, because they're not stealthy and because they're not designed for a pilot to be able to take the initiative and go, oh, that's a threat there right now that just popped up. I'm going to go deal with that. They're really struggling against these surface threats. And if you sort of come in at medium altitude and try to do an air-to-air mission or something like that in the vicinity of these surface-to-air missiles, you're going to get shot down. And that has happened on both sides. So
maybe not now in the case of Ukraine, but back here in Finland, having the F-35s come here, will it be required to integrate new systems on the ground for those forces in order to be able to utilize the added situational awareness that the F-35s are providing, or do we already have systems in place for that?
Yeah, so you do. So I think and it's not going to be a huge technical challenge necessarily, but there'll have to be interfaces, so data interfaces to, for example, for the F-35, some of the data that the sensors collect is so precise that it's classified at an extremely high level that we call the special access program level.
Okay.
And some of that can't be disseminated to non-F-35s. But there is a way to down-convert that. There's also national level restrictions. When an F-35 is flying over Finland going against, let's just not even say it's combat. Let's just say you're doing a training mission in Finland, okay? And maybe there's Norwegian or other airplanes that you're training with. But you're collecting very precise information on your own Finnish systems on the ground in your F-35. And you may not want all that information sent even to a friendly nation. But there's also ways to downgrade that information as well. So there are technical ways to do this, and each country has a slightly different structure for their national command and control network. So signals might have to be converted from one format to the other. But ultimately, the idea is to not get everybody on the same network, because that's probably never going to happen. But the idea is to get all the networks to be able to interface with each other in real time. So it's not so much a piece of equipment on the ground, but it's the connection that it has to something else. We might have to put, a piece of hardware in there or something like that to be able to convert that signal. So that's all technically doable. But again, when it comes to classified data and national data, there are approvals that have to be gotten, from all the governments involved. And I'm sure we'll get there because Ukraine is a forcing factor for all this.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I don't have. I feel like
I feel like there is a ton of questions
Yes, exactly.
about how we are able to formulate them is probably not possible right now.
Yeah, exactly. And
yeah,
we've gone through your career, the F-35, the Finnish Air Force, and what's going on in Ukraine right now. I think that makes for a pretty good package already there. And maybe we'll gather around a Q&A session later.
Okay. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Scott, for this.
Thank you, Ville, and thank you, Ville. Yeah, I've really enjoyed being here. I've never done a podcast before, but it's actually been quite a bit of fun.
Awesome.
I love the fact that we keep bumping into these situations where we're interviewing people who have done amazing things. So you've flown four different fighter jets, but we can still provide you with a new experience with a bunkered ass studio with some camo netting on it. So I'm happy to do that.
Yeah. It was a pleasure, and we would love to have you back at some point.
Yeah. Well, as far as I know, I'm going to keep coming here for a while, so happy to do it.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Until next time.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah.